Hello and welcome back to another episode of Kingdom Mothers. I'm your host, Brittany Thomas, and today we're meeting Karen Mettam on the podcast. I mentioned her last week, and she is another author in the anthology book Restore My Soul that I got to be a part of that project and wrote my chapter on my infertility and adoption journey to motherhood and just how God had restored that desire to be a mother and redeemed that definition of motherhood for me. And so on today's episode, I get to introduce you to Karen Mettam, and she is another beautiful friend, sister in Christ that I met through the Kingdom Alliance community. And she shares her powerful story of just walking through some really hard seasons, abuse, just being misused and mistreated throughout her life, and how God had healed different parts of her story and some of the broken pieces in her life after struggling with abuse and being betrayed by people who were supposed to be there for her and protect her. So I really hope that this encourages you and equips you if you're going through a similar season, or if you know somebody is, maybe you could pass this book along to them or this episode along to them. And I look forward to introducing you to Karen. She is an amazing woman. She lives in England, so you're gonna have a fun accent to hear, just besides my Indiana accent today. And I'm just excited for you to meet her and just hear her beautiful story. So, without further ado, let's meet Karen Mettam. Thank you.
Hello and welcome back to another episode. I'm so excited to introduce my friend Karen Mettam. We met through the Kingdom Alliance community, and we've actually been able to meet in person at a couple of different Activate conferences that Kingdom Alliance hosts. So, Karen, welcome all the way
Thank
from across the
you.
pond, if you will.
Yes.
So I'm so excited. For those of you who don't know Karen, she is one of the authors in the Restore My Soul anthology. You've heard me talk about this because I'm also one of the authors on it. So I was like, I'm so excited to get to interview a couple of the other authors. So hopefully you're enjoying these episodes. So Karen, I would love for you to share your story around and just your experience around deciding to do this. Have you ever done an anthology or written a book before?
That's interesting. I actually got asked to do an anthology about 4 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, because I've always felt as if I've wanted to write
Mhm.
a story. I think sometimes you can forget what you used to really enjoy doing when you was younger. And
Yeah.
I used to do poetry, I used to do creative writing. So when that opportunity came up a few years ago, I'm like, yeah, I could actually be part of it. I think it was like a devotional or a,
Hmm.
30-day book. Um, and I actually really enjoyed that process. But what happened is that the person that was setting it up kind of took the money and disappeared.
Ouch.
And so took the money, took the work,
Hmm.
and just disappeared, and we never heard anything from them since. And so, although that happened, it was a really great process for me to go through because it made me realize actually I loved the whole thing of
Hmm.
putting my thoughts and views and opinions, stories down. And so, yeah, I've always wanted to be part of. And so when this opportunity came up, it's like, I think as soon as he talks about like writing a book, and it's like I'm in, I'm
Yeah.
all in, especially with you girls,
Okay.
because I couldn't think of a better place to do
Hmm.
a book like that.
Yes. Well, I love that God just restored that and redeemed that story of the first anthology kind of falling apart and
Yeah.
not having the integrity. And then I also love that your heart was still open and trusting the process, even though you've kind of been burned before. So I'm so glad I read your story and I like was highlighting. So I have it pulled over here. So I'll probably I might have to pull out some things and talk about them. But before we
Mhm.
dive into your story, I'd love for you to also just share like what was the actual writing process like for you? Because your story is pretty vulnerable and it definitely goes into some places that a lot of people, are hush hush about different traumas
Yeah.
and stories. So how was
Yeah.
that writing?
So it was a really interesting process because I part of my story is about how going through having an abortion as a Christian. And in my head, and I'm like, God, even though as I'm writing it, those
Yeah.
two I don't go together. I grew up so against abortion, and I think until that happened to me, it's like, and obviously you read through the story of like
Yeah.
the what's, wherefores, and whys. I was so kind of, God just taking me back to those moments, and me just having this overwhelming sense of God, you are so good to me.
Mhm.
You're so good to me because, and I mentioned it in the book, where it's like when I decided to have an abortion, it wasn't just aborting a baby.
Yeah.
It was aborting her opportunity to call me mum and to be here and to have that relationship with her here on earth. Um, but I think just the whole process was so healing for me because
Mhm.
it was a place of, just a kind of compounding effect of Psalm 23, where he
Yeah.
says, I will, I'm going to
Mm.
lay beside the still waters and I'm going to lead you through the green pastures. And even though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'm with you.
Yeah.
And even later on in the chapter in that particular psalm, and it says, goodness and mercy will follow you all the days of your
Mhm.
life. And I start reading that and I'm like, that doesn't say like they follow you on the good days.
Yeah.
It says all the days of my life, goodness and mercy will follow me. And so in every traumatic situation, every bad situation that I'm going through, every good day, every happy day, every sad day, every day when it was like really dark,
Yeah.
goodness and mercy was still following me. And what they're not following from a distance. The way the translation of that verse is they are literally nipping at your heels like a couple of sheepdogs.
Yes.
And so I think for me, the whole process was so just testament to God's goodness
Mhm.
in it all.
Yes. Yes. I'm gonna pull out because I literally wrote the word yes to some paragraphs next to when I was like, well, one, I love the shot that you referenced, the shack. That is one of my favorite movies to just really, I don't know. I love how they portray God in different, like he's the kind of the older neighbor woman in the beginning, and then when the main person is going through a more difficult and he has to forgive, he's like this older wise man. And so I love how like God shows up in different parts of their stories as like a softer or maybe like a stronger person because that's what we need at that time. And I love that you referenced the story of because in the shock, like the dad had lost his baby girl, and Jesus allowed him to kind of like see her in heaven, and
Yeah.
that you were given those visions. I felt like those heavenly visions
Yeah.
to see
Yeah.
your daughter, and the fact that you knew it was a daughter too, which I thought was really cool that Jesus had kind of given you that inner knowing that you had a daughter and she's safe in my arms right now. And I thought that was like such a beautiful just redemption, restoration for part of your story. And I just, like you said, how good God is to give that to you,
Yeah.
despite what choices that you had made. So I thought
Yeah.
that was awesome. And then I also love the forgiveness part of your story, especially with the lead person in leadership who had gone to jail. And now they were leading a worship service, and you were like, no. And you're like having this moment in the bathroom, and I'm just like, I've been there, I understand that. I bet God's just like, if I can't forgive him, how can I forgive you? And just how you were able to go up and just forgive that person. And when you were talking about the prison, oh, where is that? Let me find that part. Because it was talking about how like he may have been in an actual prison, but his spirit, his soul was free, whereas you were on the outside in like a free, the sense of like you were free and you weren't in prison, but you were in your own prison just by
Yeah.
holding on to the trauma and the unforgiveness and the bitterness and the
Mm.
anger. And so I thought that was a really powerful part of your story, and I'm really glad that you shared that.
Yeah, it was so powerful when I came to that realization, because it's like I could have chosen that night
Hmm.
to walk out of there and chosen not to forgive him.
Yeah.
I could have done that, and God wouldn't have loved me any less or any more, depending on what decision I made. The difference it made was to me, and to my freedom in receiving the fullness of forgiveness, the
Mhm.
fullness of grace that God's got for all of us, you know, and
Yeah.
just showing that actually it was like such a level playing field, because when God said that to me, and he's like, if I can't forgive him,
Mhm.
I can't forgive you. And I'm like, that's not fair. So I was still on this paddy. And
Yes.
then thinking, but actually, do I believe that God is God? And is God capable of loving me above somebody else?
Mhm.
Is he capable? Because if that rings true for me, then it means that he's capable of loving somebody else more than he loves me. And this whole thing of like, that's if that's possible, then God can't be God.
Yeah.
Because it's not in his character, it's not in his life, it's impossible for him to do that.
Yeah.
And it's like, and he loved that guy that was operating out of his pain and his traumas from somewhere.
Mhm.
And he was as crazy about him as he was about me. And I think that realization of like, oh, you just leveled the playing field right there. And
Yeah.
it didn't, although it didn't feel good, because it's like he loves him just as much as he loves me. And I didn't want that to be right. I didn't want it to be true at the time, because I was still like spitting feathers and just sort of like throwing up all these different expletives to God, sort of like, who do you think you are? And then I kind of
Yes.
like, realized who he was, and I'm like, okay, okay. But that realization of like, he can't
Mhm.
love me any differently. He can't make
Yeah.
a difference in how he treats me than how he treats him, because otherwise he could not be God. And that's where the grace that is so outrageous and so offensive sometimes to people,
Yes.
because people are like, well, he doesn't deserve to be forgiven. But neither do I, because I've done some crap as well.
Hmm.
That really, does not get to get shown on a movie reel.
Yeah.
But it's
Oh,
but it's there, and it's done, and it's forgiven, and it's covered by the grace of God.
yes. I love that. And I love how you shared in your book too, is like, mercy is giving us something that we don't deserve. And God is giving us goodness because, oh, I totally messed up that passage. But it was like God is good and he gives us things, just because he loves us, but then the mercy is like giving us things that we don't deserve
Yeah.
anyway, that we should deserve, to be unforgiven. We should deserve to, have horrible things happen to us, but
Yeah.
in his mercy, he restores us and he redeems us and he loves us through it instead. So yeah, I just loved, you had some really great like lines in your book. So going back to your story, like you had some very just like you had the parts about sexual abuse, you had parts about your abortion, you had some hard parts to your story. So how did it feel writing that and knowing that people in your family or your friends or just people in the world were going to read that about you? How was that process?
That was, to be honest, I didn't actually think about that until I didn't actually think about that until I'd sent off the proof.
Hmm.
And it's like, so we'd gone through the editing, we'd gone through everything. It's like, right,
Yeah.
this is the final proof. And I sent it off, and then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I've been doing podcasts with people from across the world talking about my story,
Hmm.
and probably knowing that my kids will probably never tune into any of them to,
Yeah.
take time out and watch them. And then I'm like, this is a big deal, because I'm now doing a book.
Hmm.
And then I think it suddenly hit home, and especially when Lemon said, right, now you need to ask people to do your book launch and
Hmm.
to read your book. And I'm like, oh, like then I need to ask people that I know to
Yes,
read
right.
my book.
Hmm.
And even Tim, even my husband, when I'd done when I'd got the kind of second edit through, and I said to him, I says, I want you to read this. And he came to me and he's like, I've heard snippets of what's happened
Hmm.
and what you've been through. He says, but to sit down and actually read from,
Right.
page to page exactly what happened. I'm like blown away. Um, and I think once I got, which blessed me so much, but I think as I was writing it and as I thought that, I think the biggest thing for me was restoration in its entirety.
Hmm.
So not just restoration for me in writing the book, in some of the things that went off, but some of the things, even with people that might read it now
Yeah.
and think, "Oh, I never knew she went through that." And because a lot of this, what I've shared, I never told a soul when I was going
Hmm.
through it. So people in my church didn't have a clue at the time,
Yeah.
you know, um, probably of any of it. So a lot of people that are that might get to read it now that knew me back then wouldn't have a clue that I'd actually
Hmm.
been through that. And my heart was all the time I was writing it, it's like, God, this still gets to bring glory to you through
Yes.
restoration and any forgiveness and anything that still needs to be dealt with if there is anything. And I
Yes.
actually had to reach out a few weeks before this came out, actually. She didn't know I was writing a book, but she felt prompted in something that I'd put on Facebook. I think I'd put a post about when you don't fit in at church, and it's
Hmm.
like, and you feel like a square peg in a round hole. And I'd put a post on about that, and that resonates with so many people.
Yes.
And she reached out to me and she's like, I am so sorry if I ever made you feel that way
Mm.
when we was at church. And it blessed me so much because I'm like, God, you're already starting the restoration
Yes.
process. Because for me, there was like nothing to forgive anyway, but just the fact that she'd reached out
Hmm.
to say that. And I'm like, you're already preempting what is going to happen
Yeah.
with this book. And it's like, and so I actually asked her to be on my, launch team. And I'm like, okay, now I'm taking a massive step
Yes.
because I want to read this.
Yes.
And so it was just amazing how God
Hmm.
orchestrated that kind of thing of like, look, this is what I'm going to do with this book, with this chapter.
Yes.
And I know it really blessed my son because he downloaded it as soon as he got the email through. And he read
Hmm.
it that night and sent me a thing. And he's like, Mum, I had no idea
Yeah.
what you'd been through because obviously I've not told any of my kids.
Right.
Uh, no idea what you'd been through. He says, and I actually thought Girl Power Alliance were just another network marketing thing that you'd
Yeah.
gotten into. He says, and didn't realize how you were changing lives and how this book is going to change lives.
Hmm.
And so for me, I'm like, whoa, that's it. That chapter's enough to get that response
Yes.
from the
Was
son.
this the son that you reference in your story? You read it?
No, it was my youngest son that sent me that. My oldest son is the one that I reference in my story.
Yes.
So
Has he read it yet?
he has, but I'm seeing him this weekend, so I'm gonna get some proper feedback from
Okay.
him as
Good.
to what he thought.
Yeah, good. That's so exciting. I love how God is using this book, Restore My Soul, to really just bless so many people. And what I'm just gonna say this, like we got number one in like
I
four plus
know.
different categories, which was so
Yeah, it's so good.
awesome. So awesome. So congratulations to be a part
Yes,
of
I'm
that
the
as well.
bestseller. Look, I've got my name
Yes.
as well.
So as we wrap up, I would love for you to share what would you like the reader, or what do you hope the reader takes away from your specific story?
I think more than anything is just the goodness of God and
Hmm.
just how much that whatever you've done that you think that can't be forgiven, just know that everything there's nothing, there's a verse in the Bible, I can't remember where it is, and it's like there's no height, nor depth, nor
Yes.
distance, nor space, nor person that
Hmm.
can separate you from the love of God. Nothing that you've done can separate you from the love of God. And I think I say it in my chapter towards the end of the chapter, and
Hmm.
I'm like, I I was hanging on to my past and I didn't want to let go of it. And I
Hmm.
did because I didn't know who I was without the identity of my past.
Yeah.
And so I was stopping a lot of God's blessings coming to me because I'm like, no, he can't forget, he can't do that to me because of what I've done. And it was
Mhm.
almost like a badge of honor in some respects, so that I could entitle myself to have a pity party, or I
Mm.
could say, well, the way that I responded there is because of what happened in the past. And actually, again, coming back to that thing of like, if Jesus died for everything that I've done, then I don't get to have that excuse of being a brat on that day
Mm.
just because I have a past, because we all have.
Right.
And it's like, on one side, realize that, and God's saying, are you ready to give up that blanket, that dirty blanket of your past that you are insisting on hanging on to? You know, like when babies
Yeah.
have, but like you can't prise them out of the hand to get them washed. And it's like, that's what you're doing with your past. You are so determined to hang on to it. And he's got these robes of right.
Mhm.
You know, once I let go of that, and it's like, yeah, I'm still like carrying this around. And it's like, and then just having the freedom to step into everything that God's called me to be, because my past is no longer biting at my ankles, telling me what I did. Because I know, I'm like, I know that I did that, but then so does God.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's just, just wanting the readers to know that there is nothing that they have done that is beyond the grace of God.
Yes. Oh, that's so beautiful. And yeah, your story is so good, Karen. Thank you so much for just your authenticity, your vulnerability in the story. And I really do hope that everyone listening, if you haven't got the book already, it is out on Amazon right now. I'll put the link in the show notes. And I would love for you to like screenshot it, share it, because we want to get these stories. I mean, like, hopefully this podcast is giving you like ahas and wows and like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, yes, like share this. We want to share this. We want to share the glory of God with others. And that's why, like the 14 women, we signed up to do this project because God had redeemed our stories and we wanted to give him the glory. So thank you so much, Karen, for taking the time out today to spend
Oh,
with
it's been
us. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.